Okay, so let's end off talking about some of these government relief and job programs that were put in place to try to help workers. One example of this is the Works Progress Administration. This is a government program that is meant to put people to work, right? It's trying to give people jobs so that they could be employed and make a living and not need relief programs, right? Public assistance. There are other programs like this. The WPA is just one example of many. There's the Civilian Conservation Corps. There's the Public Works Administration, which is different. And so you have a number of these different programs, all aimed at putting people back to work, right? So they could make money, and so the government wouldn't just be giving out public assistance to everybody. All right. And a lot of these programs were aimed at building infrastructure in the United States. We're talking about building roads, public buildings, schools. So basically, people were given these construction jobs in order to put them back to work. In New Mexico, you have a Mexican American senator named Dennis Chavez who worked very hard to bring some of these work programs to his state. And in doing so, it offered jobs to Mexican Americans. But unfortunately, there were limits on these work programs. For example, you had to be a U.S. citizen. So right there, that is going to exclude Mexicans who are not citizens from taking part in these jobs, in these construction jobs, right? Another one of the limitations of these work programs was that you had to be a resident. You had to be living in a certain area long enough to establish residency. And we talked a little bit about this earlier. So if you are a farm worker, a migrant worker who migrates to various areas, working on different farms, trying to find work, you couldn't really apply for these jobs because you didn't establish residency in one area because you didn't live there long enough. Okay, so there are limits to these programs. Dennis Chavez did do some good by putting some Mexican Americans to work on these programs, but in some cases, Mexican Americans and Mexicans were not able to participate and benefit from these federal programs. In Texas, in San Antonio, you also see government programs like the WPA being put in place, but there you would see Tejanos being discriminated against in a number of different ways. In one way, you would see Anglo workers getting the privilege of having those jobs first. So in many cases, Tejanos wouldn't even be able to get those jobs because they would be taken by Anglo-American workers who were privileged, right? In other cases, when you had Tejanos working these jobs, they would receive less pay than Anglo-American workers. So in reaction to this, you'd have individuals like Emma Tenayuca who would be speaking up on the behalf of Tejanos, trying to get them access to work under these government programs. And Tenayuca, who's pictured right here on the right, the upper hand right, below her is Dennis Chavez, she was successful in getting work for Tejanos during this time. The famous San Antonio Riverwalk was constructed by a number of Tejano workers. And so you have the Tejano community having to fight in order to overcome the discrimination and gain access to these federal working programs. So ultimately, the Great Depression was a struggle for everybody in the United States, but Mexicans and Mexican American workers had to struggle even more so because of discrimination.